I'm not going to tell you the prison story. You'll have to do some Googling to figure that out. My title is Director of Innovation at lastminute.com. I used to work in the marketing department. Who here is in marketing? Why are you here if you're not in marketing? So, I was in marketing. I started out as a developer, though, and I was the guy who was in charge of the web analytics, which is not as easy as it sounds. People always try to give that to the worst developers, and analytics reflects that. It's hard to do online analytics. I went from being a developer to being an analyst because I really liked the analytics stuff, and I was very good at it. So I became the head of analytics for lastminute.com in Europe, and I went from there to starting the discipline of marketing analytics, which didn't exist as a discipline in itself. It was something that everybody who was doing digital marketing did on the side as part of their job, but there wasn't a discipline of marketing analytics and a department to support that. And in fact, marketing analytics is the killer feature. It's essentially the killer application of analytics in an enterprise. Marketing is where opportunity comes from. Analytics around operations will only get you so far, but if you can understand your customers and you can use that to drive your marketing strategy, then you can create a lot more value out of analytics. And I saw that and I thought, if I want to get a big raise, I better become more valuable. So I got them to create this discipline and I became that person. I did it for long enough that they decided to give me a new position, Director of Innovation, which is essentially trying to repeat this in other areas of the company. So that's my story. And it involves dealing with a lot of bad data over many years. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Because to do analytics, especially if you're doing analytics to optimize around customer loyalty, you have to understand data and you have to understand bad data. Afterwards, you might think that this was interesting and you want to keep in touch. Find me on Twitter. You can also look me up on LinkedIn and link me. I'm very open to new connections. This is how I get most of my ideas. Now, a little change of subject. We're standing on a former battlefield that was a battlefield 60 years ago, 70 years ago. This is where the Battle of Britain happened, right where we are. Germany wanted to defeat the UK and several other countries, and they decided that air supremacy would be critical for winning World War II. And to get air supremacy, they thought, we have more planes than the UK does today. We have more planes than Great Britain. If we can just go and bomb their planes today and their runways and their airplane factories, they will never catch up with us. It's a great idea. If Germany had pulled this off, it would have changed the course of human history. We would all be speaking German right now. We probably wouldn't be allowed to come into rooms like this and even decide what to do. But it didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen was analytics. So it's a very interesting story. So the German bombers were tasked with destroying the RAF. And when they were tasked with that, the RAF had data about how many planes Great Britain had and how many planes they had to destroy to create this advantage that they could leverage to defeat Great Britain for the rest of the war in terms of air power. The way they collected the data about how they were doing was asking pilots, how many planes did you just shoot down? They would send a plane across, and they would send a fleet of planes across, and they say, when they came back, they would say, fill out this form telling us how many planes you shot down. They had a database, or essentially a big piece of paper, that said how many planes they thought that the English had, and they would update it. But when a fleet of bombers came back, or a fleet of dogfighters came back, they asked them the same questions, and the same answer would come from each fighter. Oh, I killed 4 guys too, that's funny. Oh, I killed 4 guys too, that's funny. Hey, everybody seemed to have shot down 4 guys. That's 16 kills. Now the problem is, they had their analytics guys. And the analytics guys were pencil and paper kind of people that took these pilots' statements at their word. They thought, oh, great, that's 16. That's great news. The Fuhrer is going to be very happy about that because we're halfway towards destroying the RAF. The problem is that the analytics guys didn't understand the psychology of a pilot. A fighter pilot has a huge ego. He just risked his life for his country. He just killed 4 people, or he thought he did, and everyone else saw 4 go down too, and they thought they killed them too, and they were double counting all their kills. They thought they had destroyed the RAF many times over, and so they changed their strategy to stop attacking planes and to start attacking cities. Meanwhile, the RAF was pumping out new planes, catching up with Germany, and they got to a point where they had enough defensive fighters that they couldn't actually get air superiority ever. So they made a huge mistake. They lost their momentum when they had it, and they lost it because the analysts didn't understand the data. Someone filled out a form, they put it into their big piece of paper, and they calculated how many planes had been shot down, and then they changed their strategy off the back of that. Now, there's a lot we can learn from this. There's a lot we can learn. Data quality is a really big problem when it comes to customer data, especially customer loyalty data. You are farther from the data source than those who have an interest in screwing you. This is a very interesting thing. Those pilots were not necessarily interested in screwing the analysts, but they had a set of incentives that was different from what the analysts wanted. Now, customers have a set of incentives that's different from what the analyst on your loyalty program wants, and other companies who intercede in this process. For example, if you're working with a third party on your loyalty program, or if you're working with a third party to attract customers who eventually go into your loyalty program, all of the data that these other people touch, or these other people have a role in helping happen, all of these people will mess with you if you don't understand exactly what's happening with your data. And it's very subtle the ways in which this happens. Data is evil. So, people talk about big data. They talk about these terabytes of data as if there's a big oil field, and that people like me can come into a company and we can drill for oil and create huge amounts of value. But I think that the right metaphor for data is that data is a piece of rotten fruit. And if you're involved in analytics, if you're looking at your loyalty program performance and trying to decide what is the next best offer we should do, what is the next best type of thing we need to build, you need to take this piece of rotten fruit, you need to scoop away the rotten, stinky parts and find that tiny little morsel of edible fruit. That's your job as an analyst. It's getting rid of the rotten stuff and finding that tiny little morsel. And it's only a morsel. If you try to eat that whole piece of fruit, you will get sick and die. That's what I found. Now, the first transformative experience that brought me to this conclusion was doing analytics for years and then looking back at all the different deep dives that we had done at lastminute.com. And what we'd found is that most data deep dives start with someone finding a disparity. Here's a great example. eBay put up a stat that showed that people who use smartphones pay more than people who use desktops. They buy more than people who use desktops. And he put up another stat showing how the growth of smartphones is transforming our lives and that people are going to all be using smartphones in the next few years. Guess what? The second stat will ice out the first stat. The reason people pay more on smartphones is because the rich people have smartphones today, and tomorrow the poor people are going to have smartphones. It's meaningless. Disparities are always leading you down the wrong path. 9 out of 10 disparities are not actual opportunities. Going into tablet today is not going to get you that rich slice because tomorrow everybody's going to have a tablet. There's no rich slice on tablets. If you're just starting now, you're going to miss out on that rich slice, right? 9 out of 10 disparities are not actual opportunities. That data is crap. Almost all data is crap. So, these guys were the best example of that. Whole countries, whole empires were destroyed because analysts were not looking deep into the data. Now, it's fine for me to explain this and to tell you what is wrong and what we need to watch out for, and that most data is crap. But the question is, how can you use this? How can you benefit from this wisdom that I've gathered through years on the coalface? And I would say that here's my biggest piece of advice for anybody working in big data analytics. Hire for good data collection before you hire for good data analytics. Don't hire that statistician who's going to tell you what kind of correlations exist off of 100 different dimensions of customer data. Hire the person who listens, the curious person. If you're doing web analytics, do good web analytics. Don't just farm it out to a tag container company. Don't just take your worst programmer and have him put the Google Analytics tag on your website. Invest in your data collection before you invest in your statisticians. Companies don't often do that. It's something that's taken for granted. Oh, we've got so much data. We don't need to worry about data. We need to worry about value out of that data. It's not true. Your data is crap. If you haven't been investing in good data, investing in the kind of people that can see the rottenness of your fruit and find the good stuff, you're never going to get anywhere else, because those statisticians are just going to drill into crap. That's what they're going to do. Hire for good data collection before hiring for good analytics. Here's a great example of this in digital marketing. How many people have done any digital marketing here? All right. So this is a very big spot. If you ever meet Google, they will try to convince you to put your ad right there. That's what they're selling. Everybody wants to be on AdWords. Nobody really wants to be on Google. Or some people want to be on Google. So Google has gotten a little desperate on that spot. You don't have to pay to be on that spot to show up there. You can be on that spot by just participating in advertising networks, bid-based advertising networks, and retargeting-based advertising networks. These networks essentially are ways for you to put an ad out into the ether, and someone will come back and they will make sure that you get a certain ROI on clicks off of that ad. That's all it is. And you don't know where it's going to go. It ends up on YouTube, ends up everywhere. Now the problem is that ROI is hard to measure. And these ads are getting targeted very cleverly. When YouTube shows that ad, they know exactly who's in the market for your product already. So they're going to show you that ad to somebody who is already going to buy your stuff. YouTube is there to screw you. They know that you're measuring last click performance on these ads, and so they just look for the people who are already in market, and they show them the ad. Now, understanding that dynamic, understanding the incentives of YouTube, the incentives of Google, versus your own incentives, which is to convert a customer, which is to acquire a customer, not just to show an ad to someone who's about to buy your product anyway. Understanding that difference in incentives is the difference between knowing the true value of that advertising. Now, here's another dynamic. You also need to understand the psychology of your competition, the other people buying ads who may not get this. Most analysts haven't dug this deep. Most analysts haven't thought about how targeting is causing your ads to be shown to only people who are already in market for your product. So it's lowering the value of your advertising. That, when I say in the market, I mean already going to buy your brand. It's lowering the value of advertising. Understanding that means that since we're in an auction format, the bids on these spots are going to be inflated by the competition with bad analytics. So if you're bidding on this, or if you're showing, then you're essentially paying more than you should. As soon as you show on there, I know that you don't have good analytics. This is sort of like the good analytics test. Anyone who shows up in that spot has bad analytics. So the psychology of the people in between how the data is getting collected and what your analysis is critical. There's people trying to screw you who sit between those clicks and you. All right. The highest bidder is the one with the worst analytics. Remember that on this spot right here. Finally, listening. Your analytics department, you don't go into analytics because you're a people person. You go into analytics because you're a numbers person. You go into analytics sometimes because you don't like talking to people. You just like going into numbers. But because psychology plays such an important role, especially if you're looking at loyalty, when you're mining customer data for loyalty, you have to understand people. You have to understand neuromarketing. You have to have a good sense of what causes people to do things and how to influence people. That instinct comes from listening. Your analysts need to be trained on how to listen. You invest in it. You invest in listening skills. That's critical. If your analysts don't know how to listen around your company, then the reports that they do are useless. They don't become actionable. There's no value. So if you have an analytics team, if you work with analysts, you got to make sure that those people are listening. If you're coaching analysts, you got to coach them on listening. Also, you got to pay to bring your analysts on premises. If you have a team of analysts in Zurich or in Amsterdam or in Bangalore and they're doing important work for you, bring them home. Bring them to your office. Make sure they understand exactly how the data is getting collected. Those analysts working for the German Air Force who were trying to figure out how many planes they had shot down and what their strategy should be next, they simply didn't know these pilots. They didn't understand them. They didn't sit with them. They didn't know the psychology of a pilot. They didn't know that these guys were all counting the same planes as being shot down. If they had sat together, they wouldn't have made that mistake, and it could have changed history. That means you need to bring your analysts in. Even if you think that they're doing some kind of desk job that doesn't require them to be there, they do need to be there. In conclusion, listening builds relationships and impact. Your analysts need to listen. They will build the relationships within your company, and they will have a much higher impact on your loyalty programs and designing those programs. Those relationships are power. If you're working with the analytics team, you will be more powerful if you do that, if you make your analysts listen. Finally, you will rule. If you follow this advice, you will become more powerful. Listening is something we can all use. And having powerful analytics team that listens and that's interconnected across your company will make you all powerful in your company. That's it.